Hello and welcome to episode 83 of the Confident at Work podcast. I'm your host and confidence coach, Anna Manning. And today we're talking about being kind to yourself because, and I'm not telling you need to do this, but I keep hearing this. Oh yeah, I know I need to be kind to myself. So I'm like, where did this come from? Is this some kind of diktat that's now like come down from on high that we've all been taught that we need to be kind to ourselves? And interestingly, I always hear it expressed in this way, or should I say from women, I always hear it expressed in this way. Oh yeah, I know I should be kind to myself. I know I need to be kind to myself. And interestingly, when I hear it, it's always phrased like that, which makes me think, is that actually something which you even know how to do? Or are you even bought in to the idea of doing it? Or is it just that you've been told that you should be doing it, and now it's just another thing that you should be doing that goes on top of everything else? And in this episode, I want to give you a different way of thinking about this, a different perspective on this idea of being kind to yourself, which resonates a lot more deeply with me, and it may resonate more with you. So if you've ever found yourself thinking, believing, or saying, oh yeah, I know I need to be kind to myself, or I should be kind to myself, then this episode is one for you. So when I was preparing this episode for you, I started looking up what kindness actually means, because to me it's like it's something that I was told as a child, and usually you were being shouted at, being told to like, or snarled at, being told to be kind to your brothers or sisters or whatever it was. And you may say that has had an influence on how I think about it now. But when I looked it up, it said the quality of being friendly, generous, and considerate. So, are you currently being friendly, generous, and considerate towards yourself at work? And is that even the way that most of us would think about it? So, the way that I like to think about it, because for me, saying, oh, I want to be kind to myself, or I need to be kind to myself, that just doesn't land with me. It doesn't resonate with me. And especially when I'm thinking about it in a professional context. So one of the ways that I like to think about it is what is my base level expectation for how I treat other people? So let's say I'm a manager, a leader, and somebody asked me, like, what's your base level expectation for how you treat those people that are working for you? I would say, for me, it's fair, reasonable, respectful. That is what resonates for me in terms of who I want to be, how I want to be, how I want to show up at work, and the standard that I expect to hold myself to. And it may be for you that is slightly different than me, but I want you to think about it. What is your base level standard for how you expect to treat those around you? So even on a tough day, or in a tough moment when things may be challenging, or maybe there's a little bit of heated debate happening, or, you just missed the third train and you arrived in the office late, like, what is the standard you set yourself in terms of how you want to show up and how you want to treat other people? Just know what that is for you. But for me, it's like fair, reasonable, and respectful. And that feels appropriate for me in a work setting. But when I think about, like, what doesn't come out of my mouth if somebody asks me that question is, oh, kindness, that's the standard I expect, like kindness and compassion. Now, that might be the standard that came out for you. And if it is, great. I'm going to suggest that the idea of being kind to yourself is something that you kind of can stick with, or compassionate with yourself is something you can stick with. But for me, those two words just wouldn't come out. For me, it's fair, reasonable, and respectful. So when I'm thinking about my standard for how I treat myself, for how I lead and manage myself, I'm not thinking about kindness and compassion because those things are not really resonating with me as far as work is concerned. But fair, reasonable, and respectful in terms of how I manage and lead myself, they do resonate with me. And I feel like that's a standard that I expect of myself and a standard that I expect when I'm dealing with other people too. And I think part of this may have come from, there is loads of really good research around self-compassion, which if you're interested in that is go and have a Google. But Dr. Kristen Neff, she and her team have done loads of research about the benefits of self-compassion, which some people also call self-kindness. And the research indicates that it's a powerful source of coping and resilience, and it's really beneficial for your mental and physical well-being, as well as motivating you to make changes and reach goals as a way of treating yourself, as a way of being with yourself. Being self-compassionate appears to be the way to go as far as the research is concerned. However, for me, it just doesn't feel like it really lands in a professional environment. And it may be that it doesn't land for you either. And that's why I really wanted to share this episode with you, to give you an alternative way of thinking about it, like an alternative route in to the same ideas and the same practices, so that you can get the benefits of them, because the benefits, according to the research, are great. But if you're thinking, oh, self-compassion, like that's a bit like whatever, fluffy, what, I don't know, but it's just probably not for me. Or even if you're thinking, oh yeah, self-kindness, oh, not sure about that, not sure if it's for me. This gives you an alternative route, an alternative way in to, I think, get some of those benefits, but without those kindness or self-compassion labels, which maybe put you off. Or maybe this is just me, they put me off. But I also know what the benefits are of treating yourself in the way that you would wish somebody else to treat you in the workplace, as far as confidence is concerned, and as far as resilience is concerned, and as far as well-being is concerned. So when I think about my 3 words, I think fair, reasonable, respectful, and yours might just be one, right? It might just be respectful. That translates to an awful lot in the workplace. So whilst being self-compassionate doesn't really resonate with me as far as work's concerned, being respectful does resonate with me, and it gives me a way in. It gives me a way of thinking about how I want to manage myself at work. And to be honest, I think it kind of amounts to the same thing. So if I think about the instances where I might need to apply my standard of fair, reasonable, and respectful, there are loads. So imagine if I apply that to how I speak to myself, because if that's my standard for how I treat others, and I know that part of how I treat others is how I communicate with them, how I speak to them, and I want to be fair, reasonable, and respectful when I do that, I also know that if that's my standard, I could turn that back to myself and say, okay, how do I speak to myself at work? Is it fair? Is it reasonable? Is it respectful? And that feels like a good kind of base level for me, at which I know, yes, I'm doing that, or no, I'm not. So what was your word or words in terms of the base level of what you expect, how you expect to be with other people in a professional setting? And are you applying that standard to how you speak to yourself? Yes or no? Another way into applying this is whether, let's say your word is respectful, like mine. How do you deal with yourself when something goes wrong? So I've coached on this very recently, where a client had something go wrong, they'd made a mistake, and there was all this stuff going on for them, this difficulty that we were unraveling and kind of sorting out in that coaching session. And one of the things she said was, "Oh, I know I just need to be kind to myself," like a throwaway comment. And it did make me think, well, okay, but that didn't seem to be landing for that client in that circumstance. So we looked at, right, well, what is your base level in terms of what you expect, how you expect to treat other people in the instance where something goes wrong? And she said, respectful and understanding. It's like, okay. So if you apply that to yourself, what you're expecting here is when something goes wrong, like it has now, you're expecting yourself to be respectful and understanding, right? That has a completely different flavor and feel to, I'm expecting me to be kind to me. Or for me, that feels like it's got a completely different flavor. And self-kindness seemed like probably a long way off for this client in that moment. But it was like, okay, well, if we were being understanding and respectful, how would we be approaching this? And that really allowed her to see, okay, I'd be understanding what went wrong and why. I'd be digging into that. But I'd also be respectful in terms of not like tearing somebody down, speaking to them really badly and, bringing it up every day for 3 weeks. So you can see in that instance that the self-kindness thing, it just wasn't, she thought she had to do it, but it was just another expectation that really wasn't landing. But when we looked at her base level expectation, it was understanding and respect. And she could come to that, see it, and then do it more easily. Another area where you might have to apply your own standard, so if it's something other than kindness and compassion, if it's respect, tolerance, whatever, is how you apply standards to yourself. So what you expect of yourself, and maybe that's what you expect yourself to be able to manage, what you expect yourself to be able to do in a given day. So one of mine applies here really, it's fair and reasonable. And you may expect yourself to do things which actually, if somebody else were doing them, you'd think, oh God, that's a bit unfair. It's a bit unreasonable that I would expect somebody to do that amount of stuff in one day. But when it's you, maybe you do expect that. Now, thinking about self-kindness and self-compassion in this area, again, in terms of the standards you apply to yourself, it doesn't really ring for me. But thinking about my fair and reasonable, that feels realistic to me. It's like, is it fair? Is it reasonable? That feels like a really good test to me that I could apply to how I'm leading myself, how I'm treating myself. So this is a short little episode today, but I hope that's been useful to you. And it's given you some ideas as to how you might be able to think of it differently. And actually then from thinking of it differently, you might actually be able to apply it to yourself at work rather than it just being this vague idea about you being caring or kind or compassionate. If that's not landing, there is another way into the same thing. And you can find out what that is for you by thinking about the base level expectation that you have for how you want to treat other people. And whatever naturally comes out of you, I'm going to suggest that you can apply that to yourself, just like I do. And for me, fair, reasonable, and respectful. I know how to apply those standards for me, and they land. And I can look at them in those different situations that we talked about. So how I talk to myself, how I deal with myself if something goes wrong, and the standards that I apply to myself. That's just 3 examples of where fair, reasonable, and respectful, I know what they mean. And I can apply them in a way that if I was thinking I need to be kind to myself or self-compassionate, it just wouldn't really be landing for me. So I hope that is helpful for you. And before we go, I want to just give you a heads up about private coaching with me. So if you're looking to grow your confidence this year, you may want to do some private coaching with me. And I have What have I got available? Well, it'll change by the time you listen to this anyway, so it doesn't matter. But I've got private coaching spaces starting in March, so we're now in February. And I will work typically with a client for about 3 months. We have a weekly session, and we look at your challenges, your particular areas where your confidence might be lower than you want or where you might be struggling, and we work together to look at that holistically and put in place the strategies and the mindset shifts that you need in order to feel better, feel calmer, feel more in control, feel more confident. So there is a link in the show notes. You're welcome to click on that and book a call to chat with me about private coaching. And if you haven't yet taken the quiz to find out whether you're stuck in a low confidence cycle, there is a link in the show notes to do that too. It'll take you about 3 minutes. It will give you some personalized results so that you can actually take what you learn in this podcast and start to actually apply it and embed it so that you can make some changes at work. So that's all I have for you this week. I will see you in next week's episode. Bye.